Welcome viewers. You are watching Tritiyo Matra and this episode is in English. There is a big question within and outside the Bangladesh. Can Bangladesh deliver democracy? We'll talk on this, and my guest tonight is Ambassador William Milam. William Brand Milam, a former US Ambassador to Bangladesh 1990 to 1993 and Pakistan 1998 to 2001. Milam is currently a senior policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., where he completed a comprehensive study on modern Pakistan and Bangladesh. He received a Presidential Meritorious Service Award in 1990 and a Presidential Award for Outstanding Service in 1991. Among his major publications, we can name here at least two: Bangladesh and the Burden of History, published in Current History, and Bangladesh and Pakistan, Flirting with Failure in South Asia, published from Columbia University Press in 2009. Ambassador William Milam, welcome to Tritiyo Matra.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me first express my deep appreciation for your love and feelings for Bangladesh and its people, both during your tenure as U.S. Ambassador and later as a scholar, writing and advocating for Bangladesh's democratization and development. May I take this opportunity to ask you my first question, whether democracy is in deep crisis in Bangladesh now? If so, why and what reasons will you advance?
Well, I think it's in crisis, yes. I think, and I don't know if I can explain all of the reasons, but let me first start by saying why people who feel that way. And I'll tell you why I feel that way. I guess I remember for me, it was a thrilling adventure to be here, partially because I arrived in the summer of 1990, just as the movement against General Ershad, a military dictator, was beginning to come together and to push him out of office. And it was an exciting time because we saw the two major parties, the Awami League and the BNP, come together along with a bunch of other parties, even I think Jamaat and certainly all the other parties, most of the other parties except for Ershad's own party. We saw, in fact, at one point after he was gone, the two leaders of the two major parties in the same room together. I don't know if that's ever happened since. I don't know if it ever happened before. I was witness to that, so maybe that's a moment in history I should be treasuring too. But I remember that after Ershad stepped down, because of the pressure from what I would call a people's movement, and the next day the head of the interim government, who was the Supreme Court Justice Shahabuddin Ahmed, called all the diplomatic corps to the presidential palace I don't know if it's called a palace, but presidential, yeah, exactly, yeah, to explain what had happened, how it was going to be run, and so forth. And so all of us, and I remember my own car had to sort of snake through a crowd of what must have been 100,000 people, all of them young, all of them probably younger than you guys are in this room. And it was a feeling of exhilaration that I can't describe, just to see the beginnings of what I hoped was real democracy. Our hopes since then have been pretty much shattered, by both parties. Both parties in office have governed very poorly. That has occasioned, over the 23 years until recently, every election brought another party, one of the opposition party, back into office. And now we have a situation in which we have a one-party government. Now that is by definition not democracy. And one thinks of, if you have a scale from authoritarianism to democracy, Bangladesh moved from 1990 to, say, the early 21st century along that scale from the authoritarianism that it was under Ershad to
Begum Jia and
approaching something approaching
Sheikh Hasina.
democracy. And now it seems to have moved back along the scale, more towards authoritarianism. So I think anybody who was here and who had experienced that tremendous feeling of 1990, when it looked like the whole world was going to be, democratic, is saddened by what's been going on since. So that's why I think, and now that you have just a one-party government, which represent kind of center-left and center-right, and you haven't got it now.
Ambassador, in new democracies like...
Worried about what's going to happen here.
Ambassador, can you rethink democracy in Bangladesh context? What are the essential requirements that Bangladesh has to fulfill to have a new and meaningful democracy?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. The first thing they need is a government which involves an opposition party. Bangladesh is a parliamentary democracy. By definition, the majority party rules and the opposition party is in parliament to try to put a check on the majority party. Now there's no opposition. I'm sorry, I know there is a nominal opposition, and I don't mean to be insulting, but in fact, most observers don't
one is
define it as a real
opposition and
as a
another
real
one is informal,
opposition.
real
I'm sorry,
opposition.
what? Sorry?
One is formal opposition and another one is real informal opposition.
Well, what you've got now is kind of an informal, unreal opposition, as far as I can tell.
Right.
It's nominal in everything but name, I guess. So, yeah, I think that a two-party system is sort of a viable two-party system is sort of the starting point. Beyond that, you need a different culture, a culture where an election is not tantamount to death, and I think that's exactly how both parties feel. It's winner take all in every election, and so a winning party comes in and it immediately takes vindictive measures against the opposition, and this is a pattern on both parties' part. I think the situation is grave enough now, so people have to start worrying about what the end. Parliament. I mean, this pattern has really, I think, disheartened people. And now, of course, I should talk about the present. Now, of course, with only one party in the government and the opposition appearing to be in total disarray, I think there's a great deal to worry about in terms of whether they aren't, I'd say, going further away from any kind of democratic structures.
So far I know, you are working in a project at the Wilson Center named Back to Square One in Bangladesh. What are the major findings from this project you have?
Well, that project is, it's not really a project, it's just something that...
Study, like a study.
It's a study, yeah. I think people really want to go back to where we started and perhaps start over again. That's the way I would describe it, very simply. I mean, I don't want to get into the details because it's very complicated.
Well, in one of your articles published in the Express Tribune, you have started with, quote, politically Bangladesh has come full circle to the tipping point it faced almost 40 years ago. The election of January 5 brought one-party government back. History tells us the next likely step is a consolidation of a one-party government into a one-party state. But history doesn't always determine politics. It's ain't over till it's over. And Bangladesh has a way of confounding pundits who predict its future. Remember, for example, that famous 1972 prediction that would be forever basket case, unquote. What do you want to mean actually?
The 72, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm quoting from your...
I remember writing it, yeah.
So what do you mean actually by saying that Bangladesh has a way of confounding pundits who predict its future?
I know what you mean. Yes. May I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah. Remember, right after the separation from West Pakistan and the creation of a country called Bangladesh, somebody called the new country a basket case. That's alleged to be Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger claims not to have said it, and I think actually it was said by someone else. I think I know who it was. But in any case, it was an American official. But
it was not
Bangladesh has not become a basket case. In fact, the prediction that it would be a basket case has been totally confounded by the progress it has made both economically and socially. And I would stress the social progress as much, if not more, than the economic progress. By social progress, I mean education, which the education levels are rising, health, which has gotten better. Mortality rates are far less, and the age of living age is much older. And also, a very important thing, which I think Bangladesh can claim great success for, which is a reduction of the fertility rate. If you look at
that, or I'm quoting one of your articles' headline, is the worst yet to come.
In Bangladesh was 7 children per woman per lifetime. Now that happens to be probably a figure that also includes West Pakistan, but it was pretty much the same here. It's hard to separate them out now at this so late. But over the years, the fertility rate has come way down to barely the replacement rate. And I think that's a great accomplishment because it is a very dense country, after all, very crowded. But it's not anywhere near as crowded as it would have been if family planning had not been pursued by the government with the help of external donors very assiduously, very vigorously. So I think it's got a lot of things to its credit, and the prediction that it would be a basket case forever on the dole, if you will, just turns out to be wrong. But if I may, if I've got a but, the politics have not improved much, and that's the problem.
And that's the big problem.
Yeah.
Ambassador Bill, in your book, Bangladesh and Pakistan, Flirting with Failure in South Asia, you have described 2 Bangladeshi leaders, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and Ziaur Rahman, in many ways. Could you please describe them in 2 sentences?
2 sentences? Oh my goodness, that's really difficult. Well, Sheikh Mujib was a great orator and a great charismatic leader of a movement. And I mean, he is a great man. Ziaur Rahman was called to greatness later, and I think in both the way he stabilized the situation after he became Chief Martial Law Administrator in 1975, and the way he built up a sort of working system which was actually trending towards democratic. I don't claim it was democracy, but it was trending towards democracy. And his life was, of course, as was Sheikh Mujib's, snuffed out far too early. So we will never know how great these men would have been had they been allowed to live to accomplish what they had in view. But so I think they're both great men.
What's about Sheikh Hasina and Begum Khaleda Zia? How do you describe them?
I would describe them not as great as their parents.
Parents or husbands.
Yeah, parents or husbands, that's right. I think both of them have made a lot of mistakes. And I think right now, people have accused me of being pro-BNP because I've written some things that the government takes as distasteful. But in fact, I think the BNP is responsible, probably more responsible than the Awami League for the situation now. I mean, they made some really seriously bad decisions in the run-up to the election and the election. And I'm not afraid to say that in public, or I wouldn't have said it.
What is your assessment of the current state of political parties in Bangladesh? What do you think about their main deficiencies? Will the current party leaders be able to overcome them and sit on one table to resolve the crisis of trust in inter-party relations so essential for democratization?
That's a terrifically difficult question, and I'm not sure I can give you a very good answer. The first part of the question, if I can just take it one party at a time, is that the government is now controlled by one party, which is the Awami League. That party is becoming, I think almost because it's sort of natural for political parties to do so, is becoming more and more authoritarian. It's, you know, many of my friends, I've been here for a week now, many of my friends who are sort of on the same wavelength that I am have been hassled and harassed, and I think the government is trying to constrain the media to certain areas where it, and you know, give it no-go areas, and so set out no-go areas and so forth. And the tendency, given Bangladesh politics, which I think are winner-take-all, the tendency will be to try and take it all. I just see that as natural and inevitable. On the other hand, the BNP has a terrible problem in trying to restructure and repackage itself, because I think it's very fragmented. It hasn't really it made some seriously bad decisions, which it's going to be very hard to live down. And it is, and I think, you know, it really needs to be repackaged. I can give you a lot of detail, but what you need here, I think, what is needed for a real democracy is a party of the left center. The Awami League kind of fills that bill when it goes back to being the Awami League of old, and a party of the right center. But I would say both parties are secular, pro-liberation, and they need to be working from more or less the same script in terms of the country as a whole. They just have different approaches. One would be more free enterprise, one would be more sort of, or less free enterprise, and so forth and so on. But what you need is two parties which represent kind of center-left and center-right, and you haven't got it now.
Ambassador, in new democracies like Bangladesh, governments that come to power through ballot box often become corrupt and power-hungry at the cost of public service. We have seen it in the past 2.5 decades of electoral democracy. How would you cure or mitigate this chronic disease from Bangladesh's body politic?
The only cure is more democracy, more accountability. This is where I think Bangladesh and many other developing countries have not yet got to the point where they can cut out the corruption and bad politics, and it's because the public has not yet learned, I'm sorry to say, that governments have to be accountable to them, the public. And when governments are accountable to the public, then, you know, these kinds of things usually are not allowed, and if they do happen, they're punished. But there's no accountability now when either party's in power. You know, that's just a fact. It's not just a fact in this country, by the way. It's a fact in a lot of countries.
Mr. Milam, in your article titled "The Bangladesh Paradox," you have concluded with this sentence, quote, "This election means January 5th election, instead of deja vu all over again, could be the tipping point to something entirely new on the subcontinent. Still, do you believe that? Or, I'm quoting one of your article's headline, is the worst yet to come?"
That, you know, you just ask nothing but difficult questions, but let me give you the answer. First of all, I think that the paradox that I was talking about in that article is that Bangladesh has so much potential. It has so much potential, and yet and it shows that potential in many ways, in the economic progress it's made, in the social progress it's made, and yet the paradox is it's while it's making progress in these areas, it's regressing politically, at least in my view. That's my view. I'm not giving it to anybody else. And that's the paradox. Why is it going one way socially, one way economically, and backwards politically? I think it's because of what I've said. Politics is just not working. Now, the part you quoted was really to say that something new in South Asia would be a one-party authoritarian state. It was tried in 1975 right here in Bangladesh. As you know, it didn't work. I don't know whether that is the objective of the present regime, but it sort of looks like it, doesn't it?
We all now realize that military intervention in national politics undermines long-term prospect of democracy. Probably you have more experience as you served as U.S. ambassador to Pakistan. But if the political parties do not develop democratic practice and are unable to make compromise on critical issues, including the electoral process, what happens at the end? Democratic dictatorship or military rule? What is the trajectory in Bangladesh case?
All of the above, I guess, or none of the above. There could be something else. I don't know. I think the situation is grave enough now, so people have to start worrying about what the end is going to be. At this point, I think it can only end badly. But what's badly? I don't really know. Nobody can foresee the future. Yeah. This government's going to be in power for 5 years, it says, and maybe more.
Even more than.
Yeah, well, all parties want to remain in power forever, so that's nothing unusual. But you could get to the point where the military, again, like it did in 2007, intervene. You could get to the point where there's just a popular explosion of wrath. And you said it earlier, Bangladeshis they're not going to accept authoritarianism very, very well. They're going to fight back at some point. How are they going to fight back? How are they going to channel that? Through the military, through a revamped BNP, through another party? I don't know the answer to that. It could be some sort of a popular explosion that doesn't have any particular channel. There's a whole range of possibilities, and I don't think anybody could predict. But I don't see the way things are going that it's going to be a good ending. Now, if it is, I will be very happy because I'm very fond of this country.
Yeah, I got your point.
Yeah.
So, do you have any suggestion to check Bangladesh's drift towards the possibility of one-party authoritarian rule or a military intervention?
Do I have any suggestions about military intervention?
Or do you have any suggestion to check Bangladesh's drift towards the possibility of authoritarian rule or military intervention?
I think they're implicit in what I've said already. You need to restore a two-party system, and a strong, viable two-party system. And then you need to make politics less of a zero-sum game, of a winner-take-all game, in order that the politicians don't try to stay in power no matter what. I mean, if you look at the history, you find that that's what happened in 2006. The BNP was trying like crazy to stay in power. They had at that point, they had a caretaker provision, but they were stacking the caretaker in government and with their own people, and obviously they were planning to find a way to stay in power. When you get to 2008 or 2009, when the election occurred, I guess I should talk about the last election, just this year, 2014. One party refused to join because they wanted the caretaker commission provision back in the Constitution, which didn't seem to be on. The other party could have delayed the election under the Constitution, as I understand it. I think people will disagree on that, but I'm sure I'm right. And nobody went out of their way to try to find a solution to the impasse. And I think, in a sense, both parties are wrong, but really, in this case, the opposition was wronger, if I can use that word.
In another article titled The Land of Lost Content.
Yeah.
You have mentioned Ali Riaz, professor at Illinois State University, that Riaz believed that the government's clearly authoritarian mindset and increasingly authoritarian actions will encourage the extremist. And you said Riaz is right, and then you explained about the extremists. Could you please shortly explain this here again?
Well, first of all, let me explain the title, because it comes from a poem I'm fond of by A. Housman. And A. Housman was feeling very nostalgic about a lost land, he called it, but it was really rural England in the 19th century, and it had been, urbanized, and he felt very nostalgic about the land that he had lost. And I think a lot of us, and certainly me, I feel very nostalgic about the country that I think I lost. I'm not a Bangladeshi, but I feel like I lost Bangladesh because from forward movement it's moving backwards, and at least in political terms. So that's the title. It's right after the election, and it was made the party in government, the party of government, was saying, oh, well, we'll have an election right away. We'll just fix it up. We'll get to an agreement. But as they went along, you stopped hearing that. And you're not hearing it at all anymore. Nobody says they're going to have an election right away. That's what they promised. I think they promised that even before the election, so that those who went to the polls to vote for them probably voted with the idea that we'll get this over with and then we'll have another election right away. Well, it obviously is not going to happen. The government people I've talked to now, and that's not too many of them, have said, oh, we might have an election in 2 or 3 years. We've got to concentrate on the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Well, right, all of it, already the kind of promise of a quick election is gone. And now a number of members of the government are talking about being in office for 5 years before there's an election. So I think a lot of people are disappointed that the Awami League is not carrying out what it sort of pledged to do. And that's mainly what I was writing about.
In one of your articles, you wondered whether a reborn, renamed, reformed Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami, if able to shed its collaboration image, might turn into the center of the opposition. Could you please explain why you think this way?
Well, first of all, it was I have not thought that the BNP should have been linked to the Jamaat-e-Islami. The Jamaat-e-Islami is, I'm not anti-Jamaat-e-Islami, but it's never been a big factor, at least in elections. It never draws more than 5 or 6% of the vote. I think the BNP wanted the link partially because of its electoral alliances are quite common in parliamentary governments, and I've got no problem with that kind of electoral alliance. But they also envisioned the Jamaat having street power that they didn't have. But the truth of it is that the government, on the other hand, has the Awami League ran the election on the basis of that connection and on the sort of fear that if the BNP were in the election and were elected, the Jamaat would be a big factor. And they've gone as far as banning the Jamaat and kind of discriminating against them as a political party. And if these policies continue, I see the Jamaat being driven underground. and that's dangerous to drive a party underground. I mean, they become more radical, as a matter of fact. That's true everywhere I've ever, any history I've ever studied, where parties are driven underground, they become more radical. And a more radical Jamaat would be perhaps a more violent Jamaat.
More dangerous.
Can you foresee, I mean, the worst case scenario is a case where the Jamaat is so radicalized that you start getting suicide bombers and the kinds of things you're having in Pakistan now. They become another Taliban or something, which I don't think right now the Jamaat would want to be that. I don't think they want to be accepted as a regular political party. It's not a party that I would have a great deal of sympathy for, but in my view, in democracies, anybody's got a right to form a party, and on any ideological line that isn't totally anti-state and anti-people. So I think that, in fact, what this policy that the government is following could be very counterproductive, and I worry about those who advocate this policy. I think they should think about whether that would destabilize the country or not. I think it would.
Ambassador, do you think this government will be able to complete the process of trial against perpetrators of crime against humanity? What will be the impact if the government fails?
Fails?
If the government fails to trial.
Complete the ICT?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never been a fan of the ICT. I believe that justice is necessary here. I believe that some closure is needed for the victims of 1971. Let me take it away from Bangladesh for a moment and remind you that I also served as head of our embassy in Liberia.
Yeah.
Where and in the middle of a civil war, and there were enormous war crimes committed during that period. And I have been advocating that somehow Liberians had to get justice for the crimes that were committed in order to move, to come together and to have a coherent country. I think that's true in Bangladesh to some extent. The crimes are much longer ago, and I think that, but I still think the victims deserve justice. I also think, however, the accused deserve trials that are fair and free and conducted under the rule of law. And I'm not sure that's the case. But I don't want to get into that. But I think that it would be, frankly, as I understand it, a great deal of very high proportion of the Bangladesh population supports the idea of justice and supports the idea of these trials if they're well conducted. So I would like to see them continue, but on a basis of really fair procedures, real procedures that are approved by the international international law, and get whoever is proven guilty. Well, I don't want to say anybody killed, but in fact, at least punished. If they don't do it, I think a great deal of the population will be disappointed, frankly.
Do you think elections?
Although let me just say something else. I'm always a little confused by the popularity of these trials, because something like 70% of the Bangladesh population was born after the war. And I guess, their parents or grandparents, some of them may have suffered, so there's a feeling that way. But, none of these people are going to be around in a few years, neither the victims nor the perpetrators. So it's a very difficult, morally ambiguous question.
So do you think elections without rule of law will bring any qualitative change in Bangladesh's government conundrum?
In Bangladesh governance. Well, I think the rule of law is sorely missing now. When I was here, one of the things that I hearken back to with great fondness is the fact that in the early 90s when I was here, the judiciary was a rock of integrity and could be counted on to stand up for human rights and for to bring justice and resist injustice. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore, and I'm afraid that both parties in the last 23 years in their times in office have made appointments to the judiciary which were not very wise appointments, and so I fear that the rule of law is not there anymore. And without, I think democracy needs institutions like the judiciary that will stand up for right and stand up for justice. The judiciary is not the only one. There's a field of thought that I sort of subscribe to. It's basically, you find it sort of in the book called Why Nations Fail. And it makes the case that in the long run, only the countries with what they call inclusive institutions, which have included all parts of the population and the vested interests of all parts of the population, and which are, shall we say, sort of have a great deal of integrity. Mm-hmm. Without those kinds of institutions, democracy will not flourish. And you see that countries which have not had inclusive institutions, at least if you read this book, have not become democratic. And there is a link between democracy, full democracy, and economic progress, because sooner or later economic progress is stunted if you don't have the institutions that preserve democracy.
So how would you characterize the present government of Sheikh Hasina, who perpetuated her own power through many observers describes as a partial election on January 5, 2014? Do you think she can march forward towards consolidating Bangladesh's economic gains without political stability?
Well, I don't. I think probably that it will be difficult. But I think the Bangladesh economy will continue. It has momentum. There's momentum in the economy. It will continue to grow at a respectable rate. I think the predictions of 7% are perhaps a little too high. But I suspect that you will get, even given the bad governance, because there's been bad governance constantly for the last 20 years, and it's grown about 5.5%, 6% every year. I don't see that stopping in the short run. I can't predict how it will do in the long run. I think that's very unclear as to whether the way the country seems to be going, appears to be going, in a political sense, will affect the growth of the economy or not. You have to think about what's going to affect both domestic investments, a very important issue, and foreign investment. Because without adequate investment from both the domestic side and foreign investment, the economy will start to stumble. And what may be, and I'm not being very assertive about this, but what may be the question is, how stable will Bangladesh be in the next 5-10 years? So those investors are going to take those kinds of feelings, the uncertainty, into account. So it could be that over the long run, the economy will slow down a bit.
What is your assessment on the role of media and civil society in Bangladesh? Do you think that they will be able to play a catalytic role in changing the course of politics, or will they be marginalized more to be of less significance in the coming days? Well,
that's a great question, and you probably should answer that, not me, because you're part of the media. But I'm very, very, I admire the media here very much. The media people I know are brave. They're out there giving their opinions on what's happening here, and they're being lectured, they're being harassed by the government, they're being lectured as to what they shouldn't print, and they're printing it anyway. They're being threatened with closure sometimes. So the answer to that is, if the media remains as free as it is now, and I hope to God it does, then I think the future for the country is much, much more optimistic than if the government is able to put, to mute it, to make it more mute. So.
Ambassador, what is your assessment about Bangladesh's current relation with United States and other Western powers, as the government of Sheikh Hasina seems to pursue a more Asia-centric policy, trying to deepen relations with China, Russia, India, as well as Japan?
Well, I don't think we have any problem with them pursuing and deepening and widening their relationships in Asia, because that would be a sort of a natural thing for a country in South Asia to do, wouldn't it? So I may be wrong, but I think that we wouldn't be very concerned about new trade or new investment by any of those countries. We would hope for equal treatment for our investors and for our traders, and I think we would get it, because there are certain international rules. So I don't think that's. I know people have asked me about that before, but I don't really think it's a major issue for the United States. What our major issue should be for democracy to improve, for democracy to actually strengthen here. That's the major issue.
The United States still thinks that she has wide and deep relations with Bangladesh, although many of U.S. concerns were not addressed here and advice not followed. What is your thinking about the future of U.S.-Bangladesh relations?
I think they're pretty much going to stay as they are. I actually think that there will be, if human rights abuses continue to grow, and it looks they have grown over the past few months, then there will be some friction on human rights issues. I think that that's part of our shall we say, our genetic makeup. We, the Americans, we will be very unhappy with human rights abuses. I think that to the extent that human rights abuses are contributive to the growth of a one-party system, we'll be more unhappy about that. But I think that, the present relationship is a pretty good one, and I think we would hope that it would remain at least as good as it is now. But you're going to hear from the United States a little bit more concern about what's going on in particularly the fields of human rights and democratization.
So you think that these are the things that causes the relationship in recent years, or
no. I don't think the relationship has been strained in recent years. I think the relationship has been pretty good, and I don't think it'll be. I hope it isn't strained in the future. But I do think these issues are going to come up more frequently, and perhaps with a little more loudly.
Mr. Ambassador, how do you justify the U.S. role on Bangladesh independence of war in 1971?
Well, I wasn't around then, and there's been a book on that by Gary Bass, which we evidently, according to him, he's a Princeton scholar, quotes a lot of Nixon and Kissinger, who were more interested in West Pakistan as a conduit to China, because they had this China policy at the time. But the past is the past. We've gotten over that. But I must tell you that in 1971, to the extent that the people of America thought about it, they were very pro-liberation. Yeah. And I myself and a lot of people participated in Bangladesh rallies and or contributed to NGO relief and so forth. So it was that was a period when the government had one thing on its mind and the public had another. So,
Some experts in Bangladesh say the US doesn't seem to have a clear Bangladesh policy. Others say Washington is confused over whatever Bangladesh policy it has at the moment. It seems to many Bangladeshis that America want to see Bangladesh through the eye of India. Do you agree?
I've heard that criticism. I'm not sure because I'm not part of the U.S. government, so I can't tell you what goes on inside the U.S. government. I'm now a member of a think tank, or what, although we're not supposed to call it a think tank, the Wilson Center, a research institution, and I don't get over to the State Department very often, so I can't tell you what they're thinking there. India is an important country. It's a very important country, and I think we've had some problems with India over the past few months, problems that sort of came out of nowhere that have troubled our relationship with India, and so I'm sure we're anxious to get that relationship back on a steady path. And of course there's a new government in India, and so we assume that the new government will have different policies and so forth. So but I don't think our policies have been really beholden to India. Our policies on Bangladesh have been beholden to India. We did disagree with the way India's, how shall I say it, posture on the election on January 5. They were much more supportive of the election as it was than we were, but I think there's been something in the newspapers just today which it may indicate that India is moderating that view a little bit too. I don't know. I mean, I can't really comment more than that.
How do the Americans, especially government, diplomats, media and scholars, look at the anti-Americanism approach of the ruling force in Bangladesh and their ally?
Well, I don't know. I don't think, they have made some anti-American statements, but they continue to work with us on things. I mean, again, I can't answer questions that only a government person could answer. I'm not going to speak for the U.S. government. There are people in our embassy that will. There are people in Washington that will. So, I mean, I come as a private citizen, as a private American citizen, with a history here in Bangladesh, of course, and I don't feel any anti-Americanism at all.
Do you think the present change in India's power structure with Narendra Modi as Prime Minister will have any visible impact on the emerging politics in Bangladesh?
My crystal ball doesn't extend to India, so I don't know the answer to that. Okay, I think that the Modi, as far as I can make out from newspaper articles and so forth, the Modi government is a very pragmatic and practical, going to be a very pragmatic and practical government. It is also, for the first time in 30 years, a government that one party has a majority in the parliament, or whatever they call it. And I think that, this will make a difference. It will be a much more clearly defined policy, whatever it is.
But let's talk about India's relations with big powers. Delhi has developed a very strong ties with USA, although in the second term of UPA government, we saw some misunderstandings between Delhi and Washington, especially on diplomat Debjani and Bangladesh issues, as you mentioned. America's relation with Modi has been not warm until recently. He was denied US visa, though the ban has been lifted recently. Meanwhile, he developed a very strong relations with China and Japan, although Modi has to maintain strong ties with USA. Do you think he will focus on more balanced relation with China and America, or economically he will develop a strong tie with China and geopolitically will be closer to Washington?
That's a question you should ask one of the Indian analysts who visit Bangladesh, not me. I don't know. I think that, Mr. Modi is a very pragmatic guy. We're going to try and work with him, I think, we, the United States, although, again, I don't speak for the U.S. government, but I gather that we've already sent the Assistant Secretary to Delhi to take the pulse of the new government, shall we say. And we're going to work very closely with India on the issues that mutually concern us, I think.
But let us focus on the Indian Ocean.
The which?
Indian Ocean.
Indian Ocean.
But there are a lot of tensions among big powers on the freedom of navigation on the high seas.
Yeah.
Are we going to see power play of Navy forces of key powers in the Indian Ocean? Where does US stand in this picture?
Sir, that is a question that I can't answer. I'm not going to answer. You have to get a U.S. government spokesman to answer that kind of question. I'm sure we want I would think we want the Indian Ocean to be usable by all of the major powers.
Do you see an end of U.S. engagement with Pakistan after 2014 when it withdrew troops from Afghanistan?
No.
And
first of all, go ahead, sorry.
And is Afghanistan becoming a proxy battleground between Pakistan and India? What do you think?
Let me say to the second question,
to
the second question, I hope not. I hope the answer is no. But the first question is a more important question in a sense. And that is that, first of all, let me say, we're not totally withdrawing after 2014. We are drawing down. We'll be down to 9,800 troops. At least that's what I've heard. That's what our government has announced. In Afghanistan, we are continuing to try to work with the Afghan government to bring the Afghan Taliban into some sort of agreement, some sort of peace deal. I think that that will be continued. I think we will continue to train the Afghan army. I actually am fairly optimistic about the future of Afghanistan. I think that, assuming that Pakistan does not play a spoiler role up there, I think that Afghanistan may actually succeed in a peace process and begin to develop as a nation. It's a very, very fragile place right now, I know that. As to, I think, the beginning of your question about Pakistan, Pakistan is very important strategically, and it will remain so. And we hope, among other things, that it plays a supportive role in the Afghan peace process. So our relationship with Pakistan will continue and probably continue very strongly into the foreseeable future. I see no way that we're going to sort of divorce ourselves from Pakistan.
What actually determines the U.S. foreign policy, its own domestic dynamics or global strategic perspectives?
Both.
Both.
I mean, both of the above. If you read my favorite, one of my favorite historians, although he was a historian of Soviet Russia, was the famous diplomat George Kennan. He wrote a book way back in 1950 about U.S. foreign policy, and he came to the conclusion, and I think it was kind of a conclusion that he didn't like, was that U.S. foreign policy is quite often driven by domestic politics. And the proof of that was in some of he had 6 examples, I think, of that being where that happened. So, yes, domestic politics influences our foreign policy, always will, always has, always will. But that's no different than any other country. But we do take account of global geostrategic interests. Sometimes I think we get confused on what our interests are. Probably other countries do too. For example, I think we got terribly confused in the early parts of this century about, what our interests were in, shall we say, Iraq, where we made some serious mistakes, and we occasionally make more mistakes. But we do think geostrategically about what our interests are, but we also pay attention to what the politics are. And remember, we are a democracy. We have a legislature, a Senate, and a House of Representatives. that have a big say in foreign policy. And the president just doesn't make foreign policy on his own. He has to go to Congress and get the money for it if it requires money. He has to get permission for many of the things he does. And so this Congress holds a great deal of power on this issue.
Ambassador, to save the Grameen Bank, you have suggested in your article titled Dhaka forecloses the Grameen Bank that, quote, the US and European governments will have to threaten to cut off bilateral assistance programs and other aid through multilateral institutions like the World Bank, unquote. Why you were suggesting this? Why didn't you think about Bangladeshi ordinary people?
Well, that article was written several years ago. Yeah. It's not very recent. What I suggested, which at the time I thought was reasonable, did not happen. And the government of Bangladesh went ahead with its program on the Grameen Bank, despite our jawboning, if you will. So we didn't have the leverage we thought we had. And we were unwilling, and this is quite often the case, we were unwilling to use our aid programs or the international institutions programs which actually help Bangladesh people. We were unwilling to use them make them hostage to the policy on Grameen. So we tried to talk the government into a different policy. They were adamant. They went ahead. They're going ahead still. It's not over yet.
Against Professor Yunus and Grameen Bank.
Sorry?
Against Professor Muhammad Yunus and Grameen Bank.
Yeah, the policies continue to go ahead. Professor Yunus is still, not him so much as the board is still holding out. Professor Yunus has really left he doesn't really have the bank. It's not part of the bank anymore. So, but I see him quite when I'm here. He's a great man. He's a very great man, and I thought it was a damn shame that the government treated him so poorly. But I'm just one person. I think that my anger on that was shared by a whole bunch of other people, including Hillary Clinton,
Ambassador,
President Clinton, and many other Americans.
We are at the end of our program. Could you think of the best as well as the worst scenarios that Bangladesh should face in political arena in the coming days?
I think what Bangladesh faces is the seems inexorable to me, sort of drift towards authoritarianism in a one-party government and a drift towards a one-party state. This strikes me as very, very deleterious to Bangladesh's long-term future, and I would hope that's why I say that what has to be done is to somehow get a second party strengthened, refurbished, a party that will be so you have a real two-party system.
Ambassador William Bill Milam, thank you so much indeed for joining with us.
Thank you.
Viewers, you can also watch this show on YouTube, Facebook, and TritiyoMatra.com. Thank you all and goodbye.